Hello guys and welcome to this new episode. Today we're going to be looking together to Evolve Your Brain by Dr. Joe Dispenza. So before we start, I want to have a little introduction on who Dr. Joe Dispenza is, and I want to give a brief review of the book and then we will get right into it. So Joe Dispenza is a doctor that studies consciousness and how to use it to control the body. So he basically believes that since, according to the quantum physics, the brain consists of many quantum possibilities, so their consciousness is the primary fabric of reality, and matter exists only as a quantum possibility, and our observations let us choose the actuality that becomes our experience. So you are per se not the body nor the brain. The you that chooses is a cosmic you, a state of consciousness, and because of this, you do not need to identify with your existing physical brain circuits and the hierarchy of emotions that is already rooted inside your neuron. So would I recommend this book? Of course, I have read this book already twice. I think it is something I would recommend to everyone with a bit of temperament. It provides a great deal of knowledge regarding our conscious and our subconscious mind processes. I believe that today more than ever, we are always more influenced by our environment. We are conditioned by our phones, the television, our surroundings, people around us, and especially those that we listen to. So never have I encountered a book like this that could depict the relationship between the body, the brain, and the internal chemistry with such detail. If you are someone that, like me, wants to identify those processes that lead to our emotions and our state of being and wants to control them better, this is the perfect book for you. So it is a bit intense, it's over 400 pages, so you need to be in a good state of focus to really get the most out of this book. Sometimes it also gets a little bit repetitive, but as you will discover, this is done purposely by Joe Dispenza because he wants to train your mind to better learn and better remember the concepts that are written in the book. So this is by far one of the best books I've ever read, and I will give it a rating of 9.5 out of 10. So what is the premise of the book? The premise of the book is to improve and evolve your brain to a higher standard. Since this book is set on making us conquer our emotional self, let's start by looking at the human mind and how it creates feelings and emotions. So any thoughts of any feelings changes you. Your body undergoes millions of dynamic changes any second, even when we're not moving. So thoughts trigger the pancreas and the adrenal glands into secreting hormones. Areas of your brain will surge with electrical current, releasing neurochemicals, while the spleen and the thymus gland will send out signals to the immune system to make modifications and adjust. So all these unconscious processes and even more will determine what we feel at any time. Sometimes, just by thinking, we can cause the internal body chemistry to radically change and even bump out of the normal range of hormones, creating acute stress. But if this process of disruption of the chemical balance continues to occur over long periods of time, then the stress becomes chronic, and it is when it begins to cause illnesses to the body, even really dangerous ones. The problem is that we never really give this thought any attention, but this book gives suggestions on how to control this internal universe. Just by changing the focus, we can change how the brain is working. Even as you listen to this word, you set off a cascade of impulses, routing and rerouting electrical currents in different areas of the brain, firing new combinations of neurological patterns. Ultimately, where, on what, and for how long we place our attention on something defines us on a neurological level. As you focus on this video, for example, you forget about many other external factors happening around you. At any moment, we can also focus on our past or future anxieties, and we can make them a reality right now, activating electrical circuits in the body that perceive pain, and once those brain circuits repeatedly fire, their connection becomes stronger. So we can mold and shape our neurological framework of the self if we give it repeated attention. So the fact you comprehend language, for example, is because you learn by increasing the level of awareness, intentionally increasing the blood flow and the electrical activity in your brain while keeping it from wandering around. This way, you arranged millions of brain cells, then changed yourself neurologically. Let's start from the beginning of evolution. How did neuroplasticity, meaning the way that you can change your brain, how did it change us to what we are today? So we are genetically predetermined by our genes, yet we can progress and evolve. So our genes are actually as changeable as our brain cells. So by managing thoughts and feelings and reactions, we can produce chemicals to drive the brain and the body in a better state, from a state of stress to a state of regeneration and change. So living in stress is also living in a primitive state of survival, where we become more animal-like and less divine beings. So chronic long-term stress leads to the body's weakening, while our reliance on these neurochemicals causes addiction after long and repeated exposure, also because a portion of our brain is hardwired by repeated thoughts and actions, and it limits our vision of what is possible. So to change means to modify how we think and how we act by an intentional act of will. We can evolve our brain so we no longer fall in arbitrary and unhealthy reactions that is produced as a result of our genetic inheritance mixed with the past experiences that we had. So by using neuroplasticity, we can change perception of the world, so our reality. So when the environment changes around us, we also change the behavior and our actions to adapt to the environment. And those changes are encoded inside our genes that pass it along future generations. So basically, our new cells will have these new behavioral patterns that are instincts and natural skills, these temperament and this sensory perception passed along generation after generation. After a brief explanation of the mind and the body, Dr. Joe wants to write also about his life experiences. So basically, when he was young, he was struck by a car during a triathlon race. He was operated, and afterwards, the surgeon suggested that rods be placed from the base of the neck to the bottom of the spine, since basically the spine was almost surely going to collapse. So he was told that he had more than a 50% chance of never walking should he not choose to operate, as the backbone could collapse at any second, causing instant paralysis of the body. And it also added that no one ever chose against surgery. So he had basically 4 days to make this choice before the body started healing itself, and he would have to perform a massive and very risky surgery by being open from both sides to put basically rods along the spine. So he was already practicing medicine by the time this happened, and he could recall images of patients that underwent this surgery having to deal with permanent disabilities and pain. He knew that this incapacity would be too much for him to accept, and he decided that he wanted to use the innate ability of the body to self-heal. So he ate very little to let the body direct the energy towards healing, and he slowly began applying some gravitational stress on the spine over time. So basically, after a few months, he asked his friend to make an inclined board with a base on the bottom for the feet to rest, where he could increase the angle as time progressed. By the 6th week, he could already reach 60 degrees without pain, and soon later he began also standing and swimming in the swimming pool. So basically he made a deal with himself, committing to study the phenomenon of the mind over the matter. So he wanted to study also spontaneous healings and the power of thoughts. The result of these studies is what brought this book to life. So he began studying patterns where he saw in people that had all kinds of diseases that were not and couldn't be treated with conventional treatments, but were already in full remission. He found a surprisingly consistency of occurrences that couldn't be labeled coincidences. These people practically believed that, 1, a higher order of intelligence lived within them, and if they could tap to this intelligence, it could start working for them. They believed that thoughts directly affected the body, meaning that every thought produced a biochemical reaction in the brain that released chemical signals to the body. And these chemicals make you feel the way you are thinking. The thinking produces feelings that determine your state of being and your behaviors and your actions. These people understood that these rules applied to negative thinking also over long periods of time, and it might have been what caused and manifested the conditions they had. They also understood that to change physical health, they had to change attitudes first and replace them with beneficial ones by paying close attention to their automatic thoughts, analyzing them and questioning them, because these unconscious ways of thinking become our way of being by becoming hardwired in the brain. When they become inspired and diligent about changing their thinking, they were able to revitalize their health. Number 3, they believed they can reinvent themselves by thinking about who they wanted to become and by asking questions that challenge their deep assumptions. So reading and creating new modes of thinking helped them let go of familiar habits of thoughts while rehearsing the person they would like to become. Inversely, if nerve cells stop firing together, the wiring breaks down over time. And number 4, they believe that we can pay attention so well that we lose track of space and time by reaching a state of absolute focus and passion. So to do so, they had to break their routine, becoming an objective observer of their old familiar thoughts. He then looked at some experiments with some stroke patients after they had a sudden decrease of oxygenated blood that damaged the neurological tissue in their brain. These studies showed that patients were able to regain control of paralyzed area long after 2 weeks when their paralysis was deemed permanent. They were able to retain improvements over long periods of time through repetition. Subject kept focusing their mind while mentally moving the paralyzed limb, and once they could replicate the same brain patterns of the functional limb in the paralyzed limb, they could begin to reverse their paralysis. In the next chapter, Joe Dispenza explains the brain and its composition down to its very cellular level by indicating what neurons are made of, what their function is, how they work, how they communicate with each other and with the body. He also explains the evolution of the brain throughout millions of years and the evolution of the brain from birth to adulthood and the functions and the multiple areas of the brain. So over the years, the neocortex has been identified as the center of our self, so the center of our consciousness, which lets us reason, plan, intellectualize, learn, create, analyze, and communicate by interpreting thoughts and emotions and plan actions. But since we share the same brain structure and the same physical and mental characteristics as everyone else, what makes us individuals that perceive, behave, and respond differently than anybody else? Experiences, skills, and personality traits and emotions are encoded inside our neural network, firstly inherited by our parents, and they contribute to form the offspring by instructing the neurons to use genetic instructions that form certain synaptical connections, some neural connection, that basically reflect portions of the parents' combined blueprint. We are, however, in control of the brain and what we learn, our experiences, and how we interpret our environment. All of this shapes our brain by creating new neural connection and facilitating greater and more diversified thoughts, processes, and learning. So we now know that the brain is plastic enough to override genetically programmed compartments in the brain and wire them for new functions. For example, a blind person can develop acute hearing or develop sensory perception in such a way that the part of the brain normally assigned to the visual cortex will then process sound and touch. So before we understand how to tap into this unrealized neural potential, we must understand how our brain learns. The body makes new synaptical connections to evolve our brain's hardware in 2 ways: by learning new things without experiencing it physically, which is called semantic memories, or having experiences mixed with our emotions, which create an episodic memory, that are basically long-lasting memories. Then the brain works by association. When we fire already developed neurological networks, that part is becoming more receptive to make even more connections for greater understanding. Number 3, we remember by repetition. So when we put our full attention and practice repeatedly, the neurotropic chemicals are released to form long-term memories. And number 4, there is a duality in our brain that can make unknown things known. Neural growth factor is a chemical that helps neurons build new synaptical connections and to survive. Basically, a group of neurons will suck up growth factors to create new connections, and to survive, they will even steal it from other non-firing neurons. So the unutilized neurons will prune away over time. So the continuous firing of the same thoughts will basically hardwire these thoughts. We will train and form our personality. What thoughts we have, which circuits we turn on, how we fire different neural networks, and how often and what patterns we keep alive and developed through our own free will will determine who we will become. Different wirings makes you perceive reality in your own unique way. So when our brain is trained and hardwired to think a certain way, it takes no effort to behave the way we choose to be. To become better and evolve our brain means to break out from our predisposed synaptic connections we constantly fire. To do so, we have to stop our most natural way of thinking to make new circuitry. But why is it so hard to change? And why do our emotions often not serve us right? So in the course of evolution, the environment posed many threats to us. So we had to constantly be aware of danger to fight it or to avoid it. And this is what kept us alive throughout millennia. But times have changed though, so did our threats. However, the way the body tries to stay alive is still the same. So we still have a fight or flight response. So when a survival response is initiated, the blood pressure and the heart rate increases. The blood flow to organs is reduced and it's pushed to the extremities for actions, releasing hormones that give energy and making the brain more aware. But the body then keeps evaluating it to continue releasing hormones or to return to our homeostasis, which is our natural chemical range we live in every day. In survival state, the body prepares to react and thinks of possibilities we might expect based on our past experiences. Therefore, we no longer reason, but we react. So when the brain cannot associate past neural connection to react to imminent danger, it becomes really distressed. The brain then tries to return to homeostasis, but while you are in survival mode, the unknown threatens that balance and it creates discomfort, so we respond with fear and aggression. But because today's concerns are much more bureaucratic and complicated than they used to be, the body doesn't have the resources or the time necessary to make the stressor disappear. And by constantly engaging in this survival mode, the stress becomes chronic and the body becomes sick. So emotional and psychological stress creates physical pain, which produces chemicals that produce even more physical stress in a constant cycle. During survival mode, vital resources and healing are minimized, so the body suffers chronic problems. Recent estimates indicate that 90% of people seeking medical care do so because of stress-related disorders. But how does this happen? How does this weakening of the body happen? Constant surges of adrenaline exhaust the body, altering the acid secretion in the digestive tract. It limits basically our ability to break down nutrients. So high cortisol level then break down the immune system, and that generates brain cells that damage the hippocampus responsible for researching novel experiences, which is a leading cause of clinical depression. Stress also induces the brain to remain more active, more aware, which reduces our sleep time, which tires even more the body. Cancer cells can reproduce without impunity because the immune system is shut down to fight stress. So the stress response in humans often causes even more long-term damage than the stressor itself. Stress can also cause diabetes if the body stops taking glucose in response to an insulin excess. CRH is also another chemical that plays a role in mental disorder, phobias, and panic attacks. Constant heart rate increases can provoke arrhythmia, tachycardia, and high blood pressure. And then this hypertension leads to vessel trauma that causes clogging. When basically the cells try to repair the inflammation of the vessels, the stressor mobilizes the fat, increasing the level of cholesterol, leading to even more clogging. And lastly, stress impairs basic cognitive functions because the blood flow is diverted away. So a Russian scientist made an experiment by giving rats sugars in combination with nausea-inducing drugs. After some weeks, they gave the rats only sugar, but since rats began to associate the physical symptom of nausea and stress to the sugar flavor, they still got sick and eventually died from it. So effectively, their thoughts of anticipation of nausea and stress killed them. So what can we do about this? Anxiety is good and a healthy response to outside stimuli, but it becomes bad when it's chronic. So stress is unavoidable. The key is to limit the stress so we feel it only acute and it doesn't become chronic or long-lasting by letting the body deal with the stress and then return to homeostatic level. So homeostatic is not a predefined level, but it changes and it recalibrates based on the adrenal gland hormones he gets accustomed to. So the more of the same chemicals we produce, the more the adrenal glands will require. It will basically create a chemical addiction. So once we get used to a certain level of chemicals coursing through our veins, any interruption will result in discomfort, and we will do nearly everything consciously and subconsciously to restore our familiar chemical balance. So the hypothalamus keeps checking the blood flow to determine what chemicals we need and what chemicals need to be manufactured. So he will manufacture peptides to satisfy this need. So the more we experience a certain emotion that produces a certain chemicals, the more the receptor we have develop for these chemicals and the more sensitivity we have for that emotional state. So when we have a large amount of peptides carrying the same signal, the new cells that we reproduce in our body will have more and more receptors to prepare for higher demand of this chemical. So this is basically how a chemical addition is made in our body. So to change the proteins that we express on a cellular level and the effects they have on our health, we must change our attitude so that we can send new signals and new chemicals to those cells, so that if we are used to have a certain level of stress, that will determine our homeostatic balance. So when we have no stressor, we will seek one. And if we can find it, we will create a physical or a mental one to satisfy the chemical need. So the tendency to do the easier and more comfortable things is the habit that you must break to change your mind. So we sometimes fear that we will let go of things that we will miss. But what that feeling is only a chemical response that the cell produces when they are not receiving enough peptides for that chemical. So we can take control how? We can take control through our frontal lobe. Our frontal lobe regulates our behavior. It controls our impulses. It makes choices and it plans our future. We have a tendency to underutilize our frontal lobe because we rely on already hardwired patterns that take no effort. While with higher frontal brain activity, we can instead reduce the stress levels. So a study revealed that by making decisions from what we already know and have hardwired, not only does not activate the frontal lobe, but also the brain does not use any free will in the decision. So if we want to take control, we have to focus our awareness and remain in control without letting the body's autonomous responses take over. So our attention literally defines our reality and how we perceive what we focus on. All things around you didn't stop because you're not thinking about them. We even have the power to make our own mind up and silence all the body's feelings. Basically like a runner when he's running the marathon. At a certain point, he will stop feeling the pain on his legs because he really wants to finish the race. So we can also become masters of selective hearing. We can use this skill to our advantage. So with the power of intention, we inhibit the need for immediate gratification because of our clarity of intent. So we need to find a way to get to a state of proactiveness and focus and perfect it so that we may get in that state whenever we want. So once you are in that state, the first step in healing ourselves is to understand that we have a problem. We need to observe ourselves and recognize and become self-aware. We need to ask, why do we keep producing the same self-destructing behavior? and we need to tune out all the outside noise in our head and focus by abandoning all the autonomous programs that keep us disengaged. Most of us, however, don't observe these things because we never get interested in them, and we usually become aware only after some problems on our body arise. The second step is mentally rehearsing and focusing to create a new neural network. Mentally rehearse who you want to be and what needs to change and what you need to do to improve. A recent study tested 3 control groups to understand the effect of mental rehearsal on our body and our brain. So the experiment showed that when these 3 groups exercised, Group A exercised some finger movements and they showed a 30% increase of muscle strength. Group B, which did not do any activity, showed no improvement. But interestingly enough, Group C, which mentally rehearsed the finger movement that Group A was doing, showed an improvement of 22% of muscle strength. These and other studies prove that we can literally change the size and density of some neural networks in our physical brain by mentally rehearsing. So it also shows that we must be precise and very consistent in making our brain review the new self that we want to become. While we create new synaptical connections this way, we are automatically pruning away old ones, and our cells will alter the reception sites of our cells, changing therefore the homeostatic level and the chemicals the body is addicted to. So how can we harness this power to heal ourselves? Einstein said that no problem can be solved with the same level of consciousness that created it. Making cognitive workouts by immersing yourself in doubt won't work. Your former self is riddled by these self-defining emotions that create the state of mind that brought you to the status quo. We have to abandon our typical predictable environment full of associations. Once we have set our environment so that we force ourselves to get into a mindful state, we must build a new ideal of who we want to be. We learn from new experiences by following instructions of experts in the field and by taking pieces from memories and experience of our past and mentally preparing who we want to be and mentally rehearsing this new idea of ourselves, dealing with situations that are common to us. We will create new circuits ready for us to be used. The last step is to fire those circuits at every opportunity you get while you remain focused. So while you continue to improve, you have to keep looking for feedback and you have to pay attention to how you are performing. You have to continue evolving as you incorporate new chemical states in your natural way of being. And lastly, you need to have patience because it takes a long time. Once you've done that, you basically change the way you represent yourself and you will change the homeostatic level in your body. And once you have accomplished that, congratulations, you basically evolved your brain. This is the book by Joe Dispenza. I will add the link in the comments for you to have a look at it if you want to buy it from Amazon or order it online. Also, if you're interested in this kind of subject, in this kind of videos, I will recommend you to purchase my book. It's called Money You Can Trust. You can find it on Amazon, and I will also add the link for that in the description. And I will see you guys on the next episode. Thank you for watching.